Welcome, everyone. Excellent, excellent. I hope everyone has had a great week. Please be seated if you're standing. Those of you who are watching, welcome to the Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification class. And we're going to be continuing on here in the Unit 1 here of the Character Unit. We're in Chapter 4, actually. We're going to be picking up on page 89. But before I get started, going a little bit off of last class, William's class was the last one that we covered there. Just a show of hands, you don't have to answer out loud. Anybody who had to deal with any curveballs or pitfalls this week? Any setbacks this week? Anything that tested your resolve to maintain a positive character? Now, notice I didn't say any one, right? But anything, because like was talked about from the previous teachers, every day we're going to be faced with situations that are going to do that very thing, that is going to test our resolve to, of course, what we're covering in this chapter, maintain a positive character, okay? And, of course, we're going to have ups and downs. We're going to have our great days and we're going to have our not so great days. If we were to look at our behavior and plot it on a graph chart, hopefully, even though we have ups and downs, hopefully it's trending upward, right? And not going down, completely down. Like you look at, if anybody has ever invested in stocks, stocks are going to have their ups and downs over a period of time, depending how the market fluctuates. But you want it to trend upwards. And that's what we want our character to do. We want our character to trend upwards. We want to see the series of choices that we're making trend upwards. And as we relay this information to the students, we want to make sure that they're keeping in their minds, and as we covered a little bit last class, we're going to cover some this class, that they're not discouraged when things don't always go as planned, because things won't always go as planned. Sometimes they will have those off days, okay, but they can't allow those things to cause them to, as we're going to talk a little bit here toward the bottom of the page, kind of wallow in the mud. All right, and that can be very easy to do, especially when you're learning something new. Every single one of us has been faced with learning a new skill or learning a new trade or information, and sometimes it might be hard to catch on at first, and it can be a little bit frustrating, especially if we see other people catching on and we're still a little bit behind. But we just keep pushing. We encourage them to continue to push. We encourage them to continue to study and apply this information and to value it, right? The more they value it, the more they're going to go back to it to refer to when they're faced with a problem, when they're faced with a conflict, when they're faced with a negative influence being presented to them in the form of a friend or a family member or music or video games or movies or whatever the case might be. Because what they're doing here is they're taking all of this information that they've gained from the very first page that we covered, and they're building it up like we continue to talk about. These are building blocks, building it up to maintaining it, because that's something that they're going to have to carry with them throughout the rest of their life. It's not like a one and done or a do it and rinse it and forget it type deal. This is something that we have to continuously maintain in regard to our character, which means we have to go back and study the information. We might forget something that we learned because we haven't been tested in that in a long period of time, okay? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's taking a step back from a conflict and giving it a little bit of thought, so that we don't, as William covered last class, react impulsively, respond impulsively. We want to consider the consequences of the decisions that we make, because as it's important to reiterate to the students, because a lot of times, a lot of things that they see coming from influences from the movies and the internet and video games, they don't always see the consequences that come with making certain choices. So we have to reiterate into their minds and help them to realize, and this is something that as adults, for the most part, we know. We realize that there are going to be consequences to the decisions that we make, to the things that we do. And I was thinking about just something generally speaking, building, right? Carpentry, and I'm no carpenter, no builder. I admire that trait in those who have that skill. But when a person is building a house, you know, it's not just a matter of throwing up sticks, right? 2x4s or 2x6s or whatever. When they're in the process of framing, they have to think several steps ahead to the guys that are going to be doing the finish work, to the men who are going to be drywalling, to the people who are going to be, hanging windows or doing roof, laying up the shingles or laying the metal on the roof or whatever the case might be, So, when they're framing that house, they have to take all of these things into consideration, because if they don't do that at the very beginning, then the consequences of that is that those drywall guys are going to have a really hard time hanging their sheets of drywall, or the roofers are going to be off on their lines and so forth, right? And it even goes further back from that, from the pouring of the foundation. Before the foundation's even poured, it has to be squared right? It has to be square and plumb and level. Everything has to be in its proper place from the very beginning of that. Otherwise, when the guys come or the women come or whoever's doing the work come later, those trades come later, they're going to have a difficult time, right? And so that's the consequence of not doing something or not taking something into consideration at that time. It's going to affect somebody later on, and eventually it might come back and affect the the concrete guy or the framer guy, or somebody might get back charged. Well, in life, it's much the same way, right? If we don't set ourselves up and train ourselves and to make certain decisions now, then we're going to have to deal with the consequences of our wrong choices, our impulsive choices, or even our inactivity in certain choices much later in life, okay? And the big thing that we're talking about here and focusing on is building a positive character, because at the very least, you're going to have something to pass on to your child when a person does have a child, right? They're going to establish a certain pattern of behavior, which, as we know and scientific evidence shows, it builds into the genes. And you can actually pass those positive traits onto your child. Now, they'll have to be trained and educated, right, after they're born, but you kind of give them a head start, a boost, so to speak, when we learn these things, when the students learn these things, and they set them as a valued way of behaving, then it becomes a part of their genes, their genetic makeup. Well, William finished off last week on page 88 in the first point there on page 89 there, but he was talking about some room to grow and talking about the impulsive decisions that are made quite frequently. Quite frequently. I mean, I can think of many impulsive decisions that I made in my earlier years, and I think most of us can. But not having the understanding of what it means to be impulsive, it's easy to react that way. And as he gave the definition last class, impulsive means to act on emotions without careful consideration of the consequences of your actions. All right, you notice there, to act on emotions, which means there's not a lot of thought process, going into governing how we should act so that we can respond. Now we do thinking all the time. Remember, thoughts enter our mind, go in and out of our mind at the speed of light. But sometimes we have a tendency to ignore the rational thought and to go with what feels great, right? And for some people, it's retaliation. Some people, they thrive on getting even. Okay, well, remember what we covered at the very beginning of this class, that the author heard in his presence, his father saying 2 wrongs don't make a right. And they never do, they never have, and they never will. Well, once the student understands what it means to be impulsive, then they can work on carefully considering what the consequences of their actions might bring. And it might be a little cumbersome at first, because they have to consciously, stop and think about what could this bring. At the very least, they're going to have to say, well, will this cause harm to me? Will this cause harm to someone else, right? Will this cause damage to property or the environment or whatever it might be, right? And it's a little bit it takes a little bit. It's like walking, right? A child that first learns to walk, they do a lot of stumbling and falling, but over a period of time, it becomes really easy. And so do those thought processes, they become easier and easier the more we apply them. So we can quick go, well, nope, not going to do that because it's going to hurt somebody, right? Or it's going to break the rules, okay? And it becomes a part of their character. And as they do it continuously, of course, they become a person of integrity. So let's look over. I'm just going to refresh our minds here. Just hold your place on page 89. We'll just go right back to LP4D real quick. And we'll read again lesson plan 6, or procedure 6, excuse me. Not lesson plan, procedure 6, just to refresh what we covered last class there. It says, tell students that sometimes people act impulsively and say or do something they might regret. Have students read the section entitled Room to Grow, which was covered last class on page 88 of their handbooks, and emphasize, point it out, make it very important that everyone makes mistakes, but we must learn how to react appropriately in order to maintain our positive character. And William, he covered the difference between mistakes and choices, okay? And because there is a clear distinction between the two, and a lot of people will generalize their bad choices with mistakes, like I accidentally stole that car after hot wiring it. I made a mistake when I stole that car. You know what I mean? I made a mistake when I, did this or did that, right? They might feel that it was a mistake, but really they made the choice to do that. They acted impulsively is what they did, okay? And he gave a great example between comparing the salt and the sugar. So it says there, but we must learn how to react appropriately in order to maintain our positive character. And just to, because we have an acronym that we'll cover a little bit later in the lessons there, that word react there, it simply means to respond or behave in a particular way in response to something, okay? To respond or behave in a particular way in response to something. Kind of like, the easiest thing you can think, physically is when, and I think we've all done this when most of us have done this when we were in school in science class, when we mixed baking soda and vinegar. You got a reaction, right? The response was the little volcano bubbling out white, foamy froth that came from that. That was a, chemical reaction between the baking soda and the vinegar. Well, sometimes you get those type of reactions when somebody's faced with a conflict. Someone steps on another person's toe. Someone says something that offends them, right? And people tend to respond or react in a way that might be immoral, okay? But what we're wanting the student to get to the point is learning how to consider what the outcome of their actions will be and react in a way that will be moral or fall within the guidelines of the rules or of the teachings of building a positive character. And then some of the synonyms of that word react are, of course, respond, behave, act, proceed, reply, or answer. Okay? All right, so let's look at procedure 7 too, because we're going to be moving on. Yeah. It says, ask students, what are some benefits of maintaining a positive character? And of course the answers will vary, but might include being known as a person of integrity. And if they were paying attention, right, then they'll be able to draw that from the previous chapters. And it's not enough just to expect them to remember everything. As a teacher, we kind of really need to bring those previous lessons back, even though it's done through the lessons, but sometimes and you'll see it as we do this, as we go through the classes here, we go back and we draw from the previous lessons and bring the minds back up to date, because it's really easy to forget, what was in chapter 1 or what was in chapter 2 when you're all the way in chapter, 4, 5, or 6. So it's important to kind of refresh their mind on that type of, on the previous information that they learned. So they could be known as a person of integrity, being trusted and being looked up to, as we covered in the previous chapter 3, on making of a VIP, right? In that word imitate, we can look at persons to imitate who role model positive character traits, but also keep in mind that we could and should be those who others would like to emulate or imitate, because we should be role modeling those positive character traits as well. And then have students turn to explain to students that back up a little bit. Explain to students that earning a great reputation is another benefit that comes from having a positive character. And then have students turn to page 90 in their handbooks and read the section entitled "Your Reputation Precedes You," and stress that a great reputation is something to be treasured and carefully maintained. Okay, because again, we're covering maintenance, the maintenance or the maintaining of a positive character. Okay, and of course maintaining means of course to take care of something, keep it safe, keep it in great working order, and so forth. So let's look back at page 89 there. We continue on here with keep the following list in mind. Here, notice at the very top, in order to learn from your mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. The students, you probably don't have to tell them. They know they're going to make mistakes. As they learn and work towards developing a positive character, they have to be realistic, because developing a positive character is a goal that they should be setting for themselves. Well, in setting goals, one of the things we're going to learn about this is setting realistic goals. So realistically, they're going to make mistakes when in developing a positive character. But as we're going to cover here, they shouldn't get discouraged or down on themselves and beat themselves up, because that can leave them in a situation or a mindset, a mentality of just throwing their hands up and saying, forget it, I just can't do this, it's just too hard. I'm just going to go back to my old way. It was just way easier doing it that way, right? And it is easier just going with the crowd. You think about, just take a look at nature, for example, all right? Most of us know about salmon. William came from Alaska, and he'd probably talk about our Texas salmon, but he probably had a salmon that was probably as big as a person. I don't know, up there. But salmon, they tend to, when they is it spawn or breed? They swim upstream, right? To do that. And if you've ever seen a river, especially the rivers that come off of mountains and the glaciers as they melt, and they're flowing usually pretty decent. And I've seen those documentaries of those salmon swimming upstream. They're not just going through some little trickle. I mean, they're going up small waterfalls and things like this, and they're very determined to get where they need to get to, so that they can lay their eggs and bring forth more offspring for the next generation. Well, it's not very easy, and by the time they get there, they're very, very tired. They're very, very tired, and they probably just want to lay down and float down the stream. But anything, it's been said, anything worth having is worth working for. It's worth putting the effort in, and it's the same with developing a positive character. As we covered on page 2, this is the road less traveled. So like that salmon in the society today, it's like we're swimming upstream. We're swimming upstream against the crowd, not going with the crowd, in order to reach a goal, in order to attain something greater, which in this case is a positive character, developing a positive character. All right, so let's look at number 2 there, because William covered number 1 last class, which is acknowledge that you made a mistake. Simply, the definition there, trying to justify a wrong by not being truthful with yourself and others will prevent you from taking steps for improvement. And that's very important, as he covered there. If we can't acknowledge that we made a mistake, and I knew people like this growing up, that they just would not, it was like beyond them to make a mistake, and if it was pointed out to them, then you were like just totally coming against them, for whatever reason. But, there's nothing wrong with making a mistake. Everybody does it. Now, it becomes a problem when once a mistake is pointed out to you and you're shown how to fix it, that you stay in that mindset of continuing to do what's wrong. Okay? I have to believe it was called insanity, doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And it might seem insane. Why do you keep doing this, right? But if you can acknowledge it, right, then you can start the process of fixing the situation. Denying it, like they say, denial is not just another river in Egypt, you know. Denying it just prevents you from taking the steps to fix the problem. So that word acknowledge means to accept or admit the existence or the truth. To accept or admit the existence of something or whatever it might be, or the truth. The truth was, I made a mistake. I put the salt in there, a cup of salt when I was supposed to put a cup of sugar. Saying, well, I didn't do that. I think your taste buds are just off. All right? That's not going to fix the problem. You're not going to be probably not going to let you cook a cake the next time, if that were the case. So you acknowledge or you accept the truth that you made a mistake, and then you start working on taking steps to improve it. And this leads us to the point number 2 there. After we've done that, then we want to use character to maintain character. All right. And for my notes and my reference there, I wrote there, use positive character traits to maintain a positive character. Okay. And of course that's, kind of goes without saying. That's what we're working to develop here. But I just wrote there at the top, before character, positive, and the word traits afterwards. And this is something you can, again, reiterate to the student as the focus of these lessons are developing a positive character. Use positive character traits to maintain a positive character. Okay. It says if you did something that was irresponsible, and they give this example, then be honest with yourself. All right. Using a positive character trait. Right? If you did something that was irresponsible, well, the first thing, one of the things you can do is be honest. Yeah, I did something, right? I overslept. I stayed up way later than I should have. I knew I had a meeting in the morning, and I just goofed off or binge watched or whatever, a television show, and I should have been in bed being prepared. So it's my fault. I did something wrong here, or if that was a choice, or even if it was a mistake. Then be honest with yourself and admit it. And then plan to never make that mistake again. Plan to never make it again. So once it's pointed out to us, because sometimes people do make mistakes and they don't realize what the mistake is. They don't realize what caused them to, encounter this consequence. But once someone who does know points it out to them, or they do some reading or educate themselves and find out, oh, okay, I see what I did now. Once they do know, then we can make a plan to never make that mistake again. Remember, as it was covered in last class, if you do it after the first time, it's not a mistake, right? It's a choice. It's a choice that we're making. So they're under use character to maintain character. Let me see here. Let's just look back to page 85 there, just to kind of refresh our mind there. Use character to maintain character. And this is, I thought this was a great statement here. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, I guess the last paragraph, first sentence there. It says, maintaining your character will sometimes require courage. Having knowledge, wisdom, excuse me, and a plan will give you the confidence you need to stand your ground. Now, just looking at that first sentence, maintaining your character will sometimes require courage. It doesn't always mean, having courage does not always mean standing up against someone, or to someone who might be challenging the choices that you make. Sometimes that courage is just in the fact of saying, you made a mistake. We made a mistake. I made a mistake. I made a bad choice. Especially if you were one of those people that I was talking about who never wanted to do any wrong, who never wanted to, admit that you were wrong. It can be very humbling to say, yep, I made that mistake. Especially if you're in a position of a leader or a parent or a supervisor or something like that. But you know what? One thing we all have in common here, regardless of, what position we hold in life, we're all human. I believe, right? We're all human. Okay. Yeah, we're all human, right? We all make bad choices at times. We, sometimes we'll allow the emotions, which we're working to, get control of, to bypass our thought process, and we make impulsive choices. So after that, we just have to work on fixing it. Now, we want to get to the point, and we want the student to get to the point where they're not allowing their emotions, to be the determining factor of their choices, but their thoughts. And their thoughts need to be stayed on the rules that help to govern positive relationships between other people, our interactions. So it says there, admit it and plan to never make that mistake again. In other words, you will always have positive character traits to draw from. Now, the only way that the student can do that is if they've been educated with those positive character traits. And then after they've been educated with those positive character traits, they will need to continue to rehearse them on a regular basis. And I'm not saying they have to get up every morning and, go through all their positive character traits, but like we mentioned in previous classes, they could simply make a positive character trait chart, or just, just one positive character trait and what it means, and just strategically place them in their room. Or a teacher could have them strategically placed in the room. If you go into classrooms, you'll see a lot of different things plastered on the wall. In elementary classrooms, you'll see, numbers and ABCs and the alphabet. You'll see colors and shapes and things like that. As it was mentioned before, when you walk through the halls of certain schools, they'll have sayings, positive sayings, there to remind the student of a certain mindset that they should have. And well, it's the same thing with these positive character traits. The more we have them in front of us, the easier it will be to recall them when we're faced with a situation, whether it's a conflict or whatever it might be. So it says there, admit it and plan to never make that mistake again. In other words, you'll always have your positive character traits to draw from. Now, let's see here. Let's turn back to page 79 there. Just look back at the very beginning of the chapter there. On the second paragraph, it says, maintaining your positive character means protecting and guarding yourself from influences and choices that could lead to developing negative character traits. Maintaining your character must be done, notice here, on a daily basis. Sometimes it must be done minute by minute, okay? And if you look down to the next paragraph, we'll just read the whole thing. It says, in this chapter, you will learn that maintaining your character requires controlling your thoughts as well as being prepared to deal with any situation that could compromise your character. All right, and then so, we know that negative influences could be that. It can be any type of frustration that comes up. It could be a person, or it could be just a situation. But it's important that, the student understands what it means to maintain their character, and then how they need to go about doing it. All right, so let's just look at a few other points in this number 2 here. We're on number 2 on page 89. It says, if you did something that was irresponsible, then be honest with yourself and admit it. Okay, that word there, admit, it kind of ties into acknowledge a little bit there. Remember, acknowledge means to accept or admit the existence or the truth of. Well, the word admit there means to confess to confess to be true. So to confess to be true or to be the case. So to confess something to be true or confess something to be the case. Typically, the dictionary says typically with reluctance. It was covered last class. A lot of times we don't want to admit certain things that we've done. We don't want to admit that we made a mistake. We don't want to admit that we made the wrong choice. But again, this starts the process of fixing the problem, right? Because remember, change starts not from with the other person doing something better. It starts from within. It starts with us acknowledging that we've done something wrong, saying, yeah, I did this wrong, and then making a plan to fix it, to do it right the next time. And it might be 20 years down the road before a person's faced with that situation again, but if they have set a plan, set their mind in advance, and continuously rehearse these things, it wouldn't matter if it was 2 minutes down the road or 20 minutes down the road, they're going to respond in a positive way. But again, you've got to set your mind in advance to maintain those characteristics that we're learning here. And remember, this is the road less traveled, right? It's not always easy, but it's the right one. And as we're going to learn as we get further into the units here, whether it's practicing self-control, whether it's showing respect, whether it's being responsible, accepting certain things, it might not always be easy, but, right, it's the right thing to do. And of course, the more we do something, the easier it becomes. Remember, this is a learning process, and there's what they call a learning curve. Everybody has that, and everybody learns at different rates. So as teachers, we have to be patient. We can't expect just because Bobby over here picked this up in 5 minutes, that Johnny over here is going to do the same. It might take Johnny 5 days or 5 weeks to pick it up. But we must continue to encourage and build up and help the student to learn and to grow so that they can see the value in themselves first and the value in the things that they're being taught here so that they will refer to them often. Because if they value them, then they're going to go back to them. It's like a student who values a particular relative or a teacher or something. When they have a question, they're going to go to them for advice. We want them to go to the teachers for advice, but we also want them to go back to this information for advice too, because it has it there to guide them in the right direction. So let's see here. So in other words, you will always have positive character traits to draw from. And again, just remember that. We covered a little bit of that on page 80 in setting your mind in advance. I just wanted to see there because we're gonna hit that again, so I don't want to jump ahead of myself because we cover that a little bit later here. Yeah, we'll just wait until we get a little further down. All right, let's look at point number 3 there. It says, ask yourself, so after you acknowledge that you've made a mistake and then use character to maintain character, ask yourself, what should I learn from this? What should I learn from this? Right? Remember what we covered about being optimistic and positive self-talk, right? A person who is optimistic and a person who uses positive self-talk, when they are faced with a difficult situation, they very well might have this attitude, this mindset. Well, what should I learn from this? If I made a mistake, what is there that I can learn from this? Okay? Because there is an opportunity to learn in virtually everything. Even the things that we think have just gone horribly wrong, like the example was given, excuse me, last class or the class before about Edison, or was Edison that did the light bulb, right? 10,000 times, he just learned how not to make a light bulb, 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb. But he saw it. He saw what he could learn from that. And you think about this, and this is something that might take a while to grasp, and a student who has been learning the peaceful solution might not get this until many years later. They might get it pretty early. I don't know. As adults, we know that we didn't typically value the things that our parents taught us until we were much older, right? And we had children of ourselves, and we were faced with the same situations that our parents were faced with. And then we go, okay, yeah, I see what mom and dad were talking about now. Okay, and then so we value that a lot more because we understand it. But you think about all this information that's given here to us, because we're all students, and the collection of these books and the 50 teachers that came to put this together, and I don't know all their ages, but if they had an average age of 40 years of age, you're looking at 2,000 collective years of experience, right? All rolled into a series of a few books that we can read and gain all that knowledge and work to apply it so that we don't have to make the same mistakes and bad choices that others have. It's great to learn from somebody else's mistakes. You don't want them to make mistakes, but I would rather learn from their mistakes than to go through the suffering myself, unnecessarily. Learn the right way to do it the first time. You save yourself a lot of time, and you'll save yourself a lot of hurt too in certain situations. But ask yourself, what should I learn from this? Which, you know, that statement in itself is a sign of a responsible character trait, right? Being responsible in that situation. What can I learn from this? It says here, change your attitude about making mistakes. Remember, our attitude is the way we think and feel about something. But we need to, we have to be mindful about our attitude about, circumstances, situations, or even people, right? Because if we have a negative attitude about things, we're not going to be as willing to learn from it, right? Because we're going to look at it in a poor, when we look at something negatively, we go, well, what can that do for me? Or what can they do for me, right? But when we have a positive attitude about it, even if we don't fully understand something, we at least are willing to be humble and learn. And as we get into, we got a couple chapters before we get into, leadership, right? One of the positive attributes about a leader is they're willing to be trained. They're willing to learn, right? A leader is going to make mistakes, and a leader has to be able to say, all right, well, what can I learn from this? Okay? Because if they don't improve, they can't expect the crew that works with them to improve. Okay? So it says, change your attitude about making mistakes. Instead, consider them as lessons to be learned. And everything, like we said before, is an opportunity. When we gain this knowledge here of the peaceful solution, the student, they might have a couple of quizzes or so the teacher might give them from the books, and some of the test your knowledge information activities are given in there. But the majority of their tests, as it was mentioned, are going to come in their daily interactions with other people. Okay? So consider them, these trials, these tests, these setbacks, these pitfalls, these mistakes, as lessons to be learned. Once you have learned them, just think about how much smarter you will be, right? And by that 9,999th time that he tried the light bulb, the next time he did it, he was like, man, I'm glad I stuck with it. Now the next light bulb, I highly doubt he had to do it 10,000 times, right? He knew exactly what to do next time. And it's the same way with us. When we finally grasp a concept and we learn something, now we don't have to go through all of that hardship and difficulty. We can immediately apply what we've learned to get that job done. In this case, to respond in a positive way, okay? To the mistakes that we made, or, to decisions that we have to make, or to negative influences bombarding us as they do on a regular basis. So once you have learned them, just think about this. Just think about how much smarter you will be, and that's a great point there. Let's look at. Let me see here. Yes, look at number 4 there. All right. It says, "Don't put yourself down, or call yourself names when you make a mistake." Don't put yourself down or call yourself names when you make a mistake. In other words, stay optimistic. Okay. The number 2 applies to number 3 and number 4, just like it applies to itself there. Number 2, use character to maintain character. Use these positive character traits to maintain a positive character. Yes, you're going to do something, that throws you off course a little bit, but don't put yourself down, right? Because words are very, very, very powerful. Remember what we covered all the way back in chapter 2 of the effects of character within the family. And we talked about how powerful words can be. Does that stop when those words only come from somebody else? No, right? Because who talks to us more than anybody else does? Typically we do. We're talking to ourselves a great majority of the time, right? We don't always move our lips. That might encourage social distancing, right? When we're talking, but we are constantly talking to ourselves. I know when I go through situations, and I respond or have to respond to a conflict, or have just dealt with the conflict, I'm thinking about the information that's presented here in the peaceful solution in order to respond in a positive way. And then afterwards, I'm recapping. I'm going over in my mind, well, you see, how did I respond in this way? Okay, well, how does that compare to the peaceful solution? Did I do it the right way? Could I have done it a little bit better? Could I have changed my tone? Was my facial expression like? So we're constantly evaluating ourselves and speaking to ourselves, and we want to make sure that anything we say and do is building, not tearing down in regards to building our character. even in regards to negative character, we don't need to be down on ourselves. The more we focus on building the positive, the negative will eventually go away, right? Because we're accentuating the positive, and eventually the negative will be eliminated. Kind of like Google reviews, right? You'll have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 Google reviews that are great, and then somebody will go and write a bad Google review, and boop, there they are, right at the top of the list. Well, the only way to get that down is more positive reviews. And eventually, that negative review gets pushed all the way back to 10,955, right? And so it's the same thing. We don't have to worry. The student doesn't have to worry about their negative traits, right? They just acknowledge that they're there, and then they work on doing the opposite, using character to maintain character, as we covered in number 2. So if we're irresponsible, now we'll try to focus on being responsible, right? And working at it from that point of view or that angle. We don't have to put ourselves down. They don't have to put themselves down. They don't have to call them names. And as a teacher especially, we don't ever want to do that, right? We don't ever want to call the students names unless it's by their name, right? When they do something wrong or make a mistake or a poor choice. So don't put yourself down or call yourself names when you make a mistake. Now notice here, this will only lead to feeling bad about yourself, and the negative attitude could leave you susceptible to negative influences. And we talked about that a little bit before, and the importance of positive self-talk. This word here is susceptible. It means open, subject, or unresistant to some stimulus, influence, or agency. All right? Open, subjective, or unresistant. Right? Now, the words that we say, even to ourselves, are considered influences. Okay? So are we pumping positive influences into our mind, or are we pumping negative influences into our mind? And the more we say it, the more our subconscious mind starts to believe it, because our subconscious mind doesn't differentiate between the boss that put you down and you who are putting you down, right? So we want to always build up. Remember, always build up. These character traits are building blocks, not destruction blocks. They're building blocks to building and maintaining a positive character. So susceptible means open, subject, or unresistant. In other words, you're not putting up a fight. You're not even doing anything to prevent some type of negativity, in this case an influence, to go into your mind. You just, whatever comes will come. And that's what it means when you make yourself susceptible. When you put yourself in a situation like this with these, this negative self-talk, this putting yourself down or calling yourself names, you make yourself more susceptible or open to this, because you're devaluing. A person is devaluing themselves. So when something is not valuable, that's just a clod of dirt. I'll kick it, right? Just kick it across the road. Well, what if it was a nugget of gold? They wouldn't be kicking it across the road, right? They'd be picking it up and trying to go sell it because it holds more value in their mind, okay? Now, if they were farming, that dirt would be more valuable because you can't grow anything in nuggets of gold, right? It depends on the situation or the circumstances. The word stimulus there, people automatically think about checks, but we're not talking about that. It means something that incites activity, all right? Something that incites activity, okay? And the word agency there is a person or thing through which power is extended. Okay, so it could just simply mean a person. You know, a person can come when you're at your weakest and plant the seed of negativity in your mind, and next thing you know, because you don't value yourself, you've put yourself down. You've just been on this binging process of being the lowest that you can be, and somebody comes along and says, "Hey, you know what? When I'm in this situation, I just go get drunk. I just go get wasted." Right? You know, the bar has all the answers. Some people think, right? And next thing you know, boom, you're making an impulsive choice, right? And for some people, that could be their last choice. You know, they could get killed in a drunk driving accident, or they could be run over by that people who have passed out, you know, because they've been so down. You know, they got drunk, they passed out on the train tracks, and, you know, accidents occur, right? So we don't ever want to reduce or devalue ourselves when things go wrong. And this is, again, going back to setting realistic goals and reminding the student that, yes, you're going to have great days, you're going to have bad days, but always be trending upward, like that graph we were talking about. You know, always be moving forward in your development of a positive character, and eventually those bad days, they'll be behind you. Like it was mentioned before, you know, people, you know, they resort to permanent solutions for temporary problems in the form of suicide and harming themselves and things of that nature. So look here, it says, even if you have made mistakes in your past that you now regret, it is not too late to change and turn your life around. Okay, starting now, once this information is presented, a person can take it. Remember, knowledge is power, but they're going to have to put that knowledge into practice in their life in order to realize the benefit of it, right? It's like that accelerator pedal in your car. There's a lot of power behind it, but until you turn the key on and step on that pedal, right, you're not going to be able to utilize any of that power. You know, a student is not going to be able to utilize any of this information until they start to put it into practice, learn it first, and then put it into practice in their life. So it's not too late to change and turn your life around. Again, can't go back and undo the past. Right? It's not like a Word program where you can just hit backspace and delete or the reset button or anything like that. But again, you can acknowledge that you made a mistake and then work towards fixing it. Okay. Remember, where there is determination, this is a great statement here. You know, it's a powerful statement here. Where there is determination, there is hope. You know, because a person could have the smallest amount of determination in their mind, right? And a great teacher is able to draw that out, right? And where there is even that smallest bit of determination, there's hope to helping that person improve their character, right? To fixing their problems. Sometimes people think, you know, crisis problems without conflicts, without a peaceful solution, without a way to fix them. But as you'll learn in this peaceful solution, and the more you learn it, and I'm sure many of you already have realized this, there are no unsolvable problems, right? Because the problem exists because someone broke a rule. So all you have to do is use character to maintain character, find the rule that was broken, and then fix it. And you'll start the process of fixing the problem, okay? So if you were not taught the value of obtaining a positive moral character and you have been negatively influenced, you can learn from your mistakes, okay? Because remember, like we talked about before, people come from, as we covered in chapter 1, how character is developed and formed in chapter 1 and chapter 2, right? The things that are valued, the influences, the environment, the choices that we make, experiences, and so forth. Some people come from homes where there is a lot of violence, where there is a lot of negative talk, where there is a lot of putting down. Some people come from homes where there is a lot of nurturing and care and love and so forth, right? Encouraging the student or the child to be the best and do the best that they can, and providing them with the means to do so. Okay, but some people could have, you know, fallen into this category here of being negatively influenced. You can learn from your mistakes. So set your mind in advance right now to stand up and make choices that will build a positive moral character. Let's just quick fly back to page 80 there. Under set your mind in advance. And it talks about here in the first paragraph, 1, 2, 3, third sentence there, or third line there, it says, setting your mind in advance to maintain your positive character traits begins by first considering just how important it is to have a moral character. Okay, a person has to realize that. It's like they have to realize the importance of obtaining and having a moral character within themselves. We talked about your self-concept. Remember, we covered that in the previous lessons there. You're having a healthy or a positive self-concept. It goes along with developing a positive character. A person needs to have a healthy self-concept because you can kind of look at a healthy self-concept as you can compare it to something like a thermostat in a house. Okay, your self-concept is where you think you need to be. Okay, and the thermostat is where it thinks that temperature needs to be. Well, if you try to change, what's going to occur? The thermostat's going to kick on and bring it back to where it's programmed to be or where it needs to be. Well, if a person has a negative self-concept, and they might be told, hey, you're great, you can do this, you don't have to be so hard or down on yourself. And they might go, okay, yeah, that's great, yeah, I hear you. When they leave and they have time to think and they're by themselves, they could go back to that way of thinking because that's what they've been trained in. So this is why there's so much, and when you break down the peaceful solution, you realize how in-depth it is because it works from the inside out in developing a positive character within the person. It helps a person to understand about a healthy self-concept and to turn that negative concept around to a positive concept so they can realize, you know what, I can do this. Yeah, I might have grown up in a very dysfunctional family, but I don't have to allow that trend to continue. I can become a person of integrity. I can actually become something. I don't have to repeat the pattern that my parents, repeated from their parents and so forth. Okay, and so when they realize that, then remember what we said, where there is determination, there is hope. And that makes it easier on that road that is going to be faced with pitfalls and, curve balls and things swinging at you from one side and the other. They're going to have to be ready to shuck and jive, when they when they are faced with the life lessons. But on page 80 there, it says, look at the next paragraph there, the second paragraph at the top. It says, the next step is to make up your mind not to be influenced to do anything that will compromise your character. In other words, determine in your mind that no one, including ourselves, right, because we do a lot of self-talk, can talk you into doing something is wrong. Okay, so this is the importance of this point number 4 here, not putting yourself down or calling yourself names. Okay, let's look back to page 89. All right, it says, also be determined not to repeat past mistakes. As we learn from them, then we move forward. We move on from them. Instead, focus on maintaining your positive character traits. Do the best you can to avoid making mistakes by setting your mind in advance and being prepared to handle curveballs and pitfalls. But if you do make a mistake, don't give up on maintaining your positive character. Give yourself room to grow and consider them as lessons learned. Okay, and again, it's the teacher's responsibility to reiterate in the student's mind that everything that they go through is an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to learn from their mistakes, to learn from their poor choices, and to take what they have learned in the peaceful solution and even ask them, all right, if you have a class discussion, in this situation where this mistake was made, what would you do differently next time? Right? And get their thoughts, get their input, see if they're catching and they're grasping the information that's being presented, because the more they do, the more they're going to contemplate those things. So the next time that they are faced with something, and I guarantee you, once it's pointed out to them, they're going to be ready, they're going to be prepared, right? Then they'll be able to make a better choice. let's see here. Look at the last statement next to the little piggy there. It says, don't wallow in the mud. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get on the right track to a true moral character. And you can look at that mud as all those negative things there, the negative self-talk, the negative, influences, the impulsivity, the, being susceptible, all those things that will get you down and weigh you down. It's kind of like it's like when a person they learn the peaceful solution, they learn that they actually do have the ability to change the course of their life and what they need to do so. It's kind of like a big weight is lifted off of them, and it's kind of like how we feel when we are at the end of the day, especially down here in Texas, and you're all sweaty and nothing's untouched by the dust in Texas. So you're all sweaty and gritty and dusty, and you smell a little bit funny and your feet hurt, right? And you get home and you take a nice shower and you just wash all that away, and it's like a big weight has been lifted. Well, it's the same thing with this information here. We could be going through the most difficult week that we could encounter, and at the very end of that week, to add insult to injury, somebody or a situation comes up that tests our resolve. Now, you can wallow in the mud. You can just allow the week's trials or tests, right, setbacks, to just push you right into reacting impulsively, or we could make the right choice, right, and be a positive example to that person in that situation, right? And even if they don't appreciate what we said, the very least thing we know is that we did the right thing. We took the road less traveled, okay? And that's important that we reiterate that to students, because children in this age group of what we're covering here, in the 12 to 14, 12 to 13, 11 to 13, 14 years of age, they're very motivated by the influences of their peers. They want to be accepted by their peers, and if they are afraid that they won't be accepted by making a right choice, they might negate making the right choice. So we want to encourage them, make the right choice irregardless of what your peers might think. Eventually, they'll see and they'll look up to you, or even if they don't, you will become a person of integrity. So, it's necessary that we remind them of this continuously, because I can guarantee you students in society today are not hearing that enough. They're not hearing that they can become great, greater than they are, and make a positive difference in society. So what we're going to do there, because we're a couple minutes to close, so we'll stop here on page 89. Next class we'll pick up on page 90, and the next class will be 310, Wednesday, 310 at 5:30 Central Standard Time. Thank everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next class. Have a great evening.